Minimizing unwanted effects is something we all want. This is what makes microdosing effective, because you get the max benefit from minimum dosing. I use microdose for stress relief and to help with sleep. On Friday night at the end of my work week, it helps me ease into the weekend and ramp down from my oh-so-stressful day job, which perpetually overworks me. Today's podcast is sponsored by Microdose Gummies and Lumi Labs. Microdose gummies deliver perfect entry-level doses of THC that help you feel good. I love this company and personally use their products. The gummies are organic, infused with real fruit, vegan-friendly, gluten-free, and they taste real good. Life is exhausting, so if you're short on sleep like me, give them a try. Microdose is available nationwide. To learn more about microdosing THC, go to microdose.com and use code BEYOND to get free shipping and 30% off your first order. Links can be found in the show description, but again, that's microdose.com and code BEYOND.
This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt podcast. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. I've always been an adventurer. When I was younger, I competitively raced mountain bikes all over the region. As I've gotten older, and my job has taken more out of me, I've scaled back on doing the hardcore activities. Now I primarily enjoy hiking. I was recently out in Colorado at the end of October, doing some of that hiking. There is truly nothing like getting altitude sick and then getting regular COVID sick on top of that. But the hiking was still enjoyable. We went so many places after landing in Denver. We drove west to Dumont, where we stayed, and stopped in places like Idaho Springs and Golden. We hiked St. Mary's Glacier outside of Idaho Springs, the Red Rocks Trading Post Trail by the amphitheater, the Green Mountain West Ridge Trail in Boulder, and the Hoosier Pass Trail in Alma, which is outside of Breckenridge. It was a hell of a drive to even get up to the Hoosier Pass, with all the blind switchbacks and mountain drop-offs on the side of the road. And of course, this girl from Wisconsin drove because I was with a pair of Floridians, and I was the only person who was used to driving in ice and snow. The Hoosier Pass was amazing, and we hiked to over 12,000 feet. So my time in Breckenridge and hiking the Hoosier Pass was how I arrived on the case selection today. Both victims lived in the Breckenridge area, and the perpetrator lived for decades under the radar in Dumont off Highway 70, which is about an hour away. They found one victim murdered by the Hoosier Pass, which is maybe 10 or 11 miles south of Breckenridge on Highway 9. Both of the victims were avid hitchhikers. I can't imagine having to rely on hitchhiking to get where you need to go, but it was the 80s, and it was a more culturally accepted way to get around. In a town like Breckenridge, hitchhiking was so common because many people couldn't afford a car. And you really need a car to get from place to place there, because it's not walkable. The most unfortunate thing was that the perpetrator lived an hour away for decades without being caught, and lived his life in plain sight. You're listening to episode 89, Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer and Annette Schnee. On January 6, 1982, it was snowing in Breckenridge, Colorado. The temperature was chilly that day, and at night, it turned negative. 29-year-old Barbara Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer hitchhiked to work at 7:15 a.m. She called her husband Jeff that evening and told him she was going to the village pub with her friends to celebrate a raise she received at work. Bobbie Jo stayed at the bar for a little while and was ready to go before her friends. She left the village pub and headed to the hitchhike station. That night, her husband, Jeff Oberholtzer, was worried when she hadn't returned home by midnight. So he drove to their friend's house. The last time they had seen Bobbie Jo was at 7:30 p.m. at the village pub. Jeff went to the police station as his wife wasn't the type of person to not come home. He tried to file a missing persons report with the police, but they said it was way too soon. Jeff returned home for the evening and received a call in the morning from an area resident. Bobbie Jo's license was blowing around his driveway. Jeff and a few friends went to this person's home to retrieve the license, and that was when Jeff saw Bobbie Jo's backpack and her wool glove, which was bloody. There was also bloody tissue nearby. The friends went up to the Hoosier Pass to continue searching, since that was the route which Bobbie Jo took to work. Some searchers covered ground on foot, and a few were on skis. Around 3 p.m., the makeshift search party found Bobbie Jo's body 400 feet from the top of the Hoosier Pass in a snowy embankment. She was shot twice at close range and bled to death in the cold. Bobbie Jo had one 18-inch zip tie on her wrist, so she fought her attacker. Jeff had made her a large brass key ring for self-defense, and they found this weapon in the parking lot of the Hoosier Pass. There was also a strange finding, with a single orange ankle sock, which didn't seem to belong to Bobbie Jo, since she already had socks on her feet. Investigators quickly focused on Jeff Oberholtzer, and he became the prime suspect. Police asked Jeff for an alibi, and he claimed to have been spending time with an acquaintance. This person could not be tracked down, so the alibi was not confirmed. Jeff eventually offered to take a polygraph test, which he passed both times when he took it, but Jeff remained a suspect for investigators. On the same night, January 6, 1982, 21-year-old Annette Schnee finished up work at the Holiday Inn in Frisco, which was a cute little town 10 miles north of Breckenridge. She had to go home to grab her outfit so she could go to work at her second job as a part-time server at the Flipside bar. Annette went to a doctor's office and then was last seen leaving a pharmacy in Breckenridge, where she presumably hitchhiked home around 4:30 that afternoon. The next day, Annette's boss reported her missing on January 7th, as she never showed up for work, and she had been a reliable employee. When investigators checked Annette's home, her work uniform was still there, so they assumed she had never made it home from hitchhiking. 6 months later, on July 3rd, 1982, Annette was found by a young boy who was fishing. She was floating in Sacramento Creek, which was south of Breckenridge and was on the southern side of the Hoosier Pass. Annette was shot in the back. The cold weather and cold water had preserved her body for autopsy. They found an orange booty sock on one of Annette's feet, and it matched the orange sock found at Bobbie Jo's crime scene. Investigators believed Annette had been sexually assaulted, as the zipper on her jeans was broken and her shoes were on the wrong feet. Bobbie Jo and Annette went missing on the same day, and the orange sock tied the two women together. Investigators believed Annette was killed first, as one of her orange socks must have traveled with the killer and was found at Bobbie Jo's crime scene. Investigators also believed that they shot both women with the same handgun. Jeff Oberholtzer was originally asked if he had known Annette Schnee, and he claimed he didn't. But investigators found one of Jeff's business cards in Annette's jacket pocket. The suspicion of Jeff Oberholtzer intensified. He suddenly remembered that Annette had been hitchhiking, and he had given her a ride in November 1981. This was when he first started his appliance repair business and was passing out his cards to anyone and everyone. Also, months prior, Jeff told investigators he had a premonition. He thought they would find Annette Schnee on the 3rd of July, 4 miles away from his house. Annette was found 6 or 7 miles away from his house on the 4th of July. It wasn't looking good for Jeff, but they did not have enough to make an arrest. Charlie McCormick was a former Denver homicide detective turned PI who was hired by Annette's family to investigate the case. Charlie had burned out while working on murder cases in Denver and moved to Breckenridge in 1976. He followed leads in Montana and Idaho for a few serial killers he thought could have been involved with crimes. They investigated Henry Lee Lucas early in 1984, but nothing ever came of it. A man named Thomas Luther picked up a woman in Breckenridge, then raped and beat her with a hammer. He was convicted in 1982, and as he was waiting for his trial, Luther bragged to his fellow inmates that he killed Annette and Bobbie Jo. Luther went to prison and was released in 1993. In Colorado, he stabbed a young woman to death and fled to West Virginia, where he raped and beat a hitchhiker in 1994. Luther attacked women who resembled his abusive mother. The blood on Bobbie Jo's glove was tested, and it belonged to a man, but that man was not Luther. They convicted Thomas Luther for the Colorado murder of the young woman, and he received a life sentence in 1996. Another suspect was Tracy Petrocelli. He killed his girlfriend in Seattle, killed a car salesperson in Reno, and also shot a man in California. Petrocelli had stolen cars from many states, including Colorado. While passing through, he stayed in Breckenridge, at the same hotel where Annette worked. But he was tested, and the result was negative. Investigators tested the blood on the glove against Jeff Oberholtzer, and his blood type did not match. DNA technology was developing in the 1990s, and the DNA database only came into existence around then. If someone committed a crime in 1982 and didn't get into any trouble with the law over the years, they would never be found in that database. The case went cold for many years, but it was kept alive in the media. Unsolved Mysteries covered the case in 1991. They got 15 to 20 calls the first night the show aired, but received no viable leads. The Oprah Winfrey Show and A Current Affair even covered the case. In 2015, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation ordered cold case playing cards and handed them out. They printed the faces of the victims on the cards. The case had to be over 3 years old, but could not be older than 1970. Colorado had 1,600 unresolved cases, with 1,300 of those being homicides, so they ordered 5,000 cards at $1.14 per deck and planned to order an additional 10,000 cards the following year. This led to 4 dozen calls. Investigators were hopeful, as the cold case cards led to 14 cases being solved in Florida and 10 solved in South Carolina, but the case of Annette and Bobbie Jo remained unsolved. Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer was born on December 15, 1952. She was a free spirit who loved life and was a cheerful person. Bobbie Jo and her husband Jeff were self-described hippies and were both more on the soft-spoken side. They dated for several years and married in 1977. The couple was from Racine, Wisconsin, and moved west to Alma, Colorado, which was just south of Breckenridge. Bobbie Jo and Jeff were drawn to the mountains. She worked for a real estate company as a receptionist, and Jeff opened an appliance repair business. Bobbie Jo loved animals and owned a horse. She was out celebrating her raise when she went missing, and receiving the news of a pay increase was a big deal, as their household budget was tight. Annette Schnee was born on January 16, 1960, and was from Sioux City, Iowa. She graduated from high school in 1978 and was on the drill team. Annette graduated from Patricia Stevens College in Omaha and moved to Breckenridge in September 1979. She wanted to be a flight attendant, but never got that opportunity. In 2020, a local law enforcement officer named Wendy Kipple heard about genealogy and thought it could help this case. She worked with PI Charlie McCormick, who had worked the case for decades. They sent the DNA samples to United Data Connect, which was a Denver-based forensic genealogy company that took DNA from crime scenes and searched public genealogy databases. DNA from Bobbie Jo's glove and the tissue found near her backpack was used. On January 9, 2021, United Data Connect provided law enforcement with two names, Bruce Phillips and Alan Phillips, who were brothers. Investigators reached out to Bruce and learned that he never lived in Colorado. Bruce was estranged from his brother, 69-year-old Alan, but told authorities that his brother lived in Colorado. Alan lived near Breckenridge at the time of the murders and was living in Dumont, Colorado, only an hour away. He had been a miner and was a mechanic. Alan was married 3 times and had children. When investigators searched his background, they had arrested Alan in 1973 for assault and burglary. When law enforcement dug deeper into his arrest record, they found his signed confession. Phillips picked up a female hitchhiker outside of Breckenridge and gave her a ride to Fairplay, but stopped at an empty cabin along the way. He pulled the woman from his car, picked up a rock, and repeatedly hit her. She convinced Phillips to let her go, and later went to the police. He only received 6 months in jail. In 2005, Alan Phillips' name came up from an anonymous tipster. The lead was investigated, but ultimately went cold. Now that law enforcement knew who they were dealing with, they put Alan Phillips under surveillance for weeks. They quickly discovered he was an introvert and didn't leave the house much. Phillips never threw out his trash, so investigators could not get any of his DNA. Finally, in February 2021, Phillips went to a Sonic fast food establishment. After he ate, he left the restaurant with his food bag and headed to the post office. Phillips went inside the post office with the food bag, and when he left, he only had mail in his hand. Investigators were thrilled when they took the Sonic bag from the trash in the post office and had it tested in the lab. Phillips' saliva was extracted from a napkin, and when tested, it matched the DNA found on Bobbie Jo's glove and tissue. Alan Lee Phillips was arrested on February 24, 2021, and charged with 2 counts each of first-degree homicide, kidnapping, and assault. He was 31 years old when the crimes were committed. It came to light that back on January 6, 1982, besides the disappearance of Bobbie Jo and Annette, there was a third event that investigators never connected. There was an emergency rescue on the Guanilla Pass. Jefferson County Sheriff Harold Bray was on a flight from Denver to California when he looked down and saw a truck flashing its lights in Morse code, SOS. The sheriff asked the flight crew to contact the ground, and they called Clear Creek County Fire Chief Dave Montoya. Dave thought it was a tourist up on the pass, but it was local Alan Phillips, which he remembered when they both worked in the mine together. Phillips had his pickup truck stuck in a snowdrift, and he also had a large cut on his face. Phillips told the fire chief that he was a little drunk and was trying to avoid the main roads. He claimed he got the cut when he hit the snowbank. The fire chief dropped Phillips off at his home. A local newspaper reported the story and titled it, "Embarrassed but Safe." At a preliminary hearing, besides having his wife carry a large brass keyring for self-defense, Jeff Oberholtzer said his wife had personal rules she followed when hitchhiking. Bobbie Jo never got into a car if there was more than one man, and exercised caution with vans, as she was worried they could easily conceal her if there was trouble. On August 31st, 2022, the Alan Phillips trial began in Fairplay, Colorado, and lasted approximately 2.5 weeks. The defense tried to blame Jeff Oberholtzer for the crimes every opportunity possible, with all Jeff's premonitions of when and where investigators would find Annette's body and finding his business card in her jacket pocket. The defense also argued there was DNA contamination because law enforcement didn't know how to be careful and wear gloves in 1982. But there was no disputing that the blood found on Bobbie Jo's glove and tissue belonged to Alan Phillips. Bobbie Jo's DNA was also found on the outside of the orange sock that was found nearby in the Hoosier Pass. Annette's DNA was found on the inside of that sock, so that was the irrefutable DNA link between both crimes. On September 15th, 2022, a jury deliberated for 4 hours and 45 minutes and found Alan Phillips guilty on 8 counts, including first-degree murder and kidnapping. The judge gave Phillips 2 life sentences, each for both Annette and Bobbie Jo, to be served one after the other. Phillips did not speak during his sentencing and was without emotion, which didn't go unnoticed by Annette's sisters. Phillips' daughter, Andrea Shelton, was the only individual to speak on his behalf. She expressed sympathy for Bobbie Jo, Annette, and their families, but said she also believed in forgiveness and redemption. Andrea told the court that her father taught his children honesty and ethics as they were growing up. She said he was a good man and thought someone should say something. Alan Phillips planned to appeal his conviction, claiming that the DNA was contaminated. The DA said Bobbie Jo was a fighter and a hero. She fought Alan Phillips, and that was the reason they had DNA evidence to work with. Annette's surviving family included her mother, brother, and 2 sisters. Bobbie Jo's family included her husband, her daughter, and her younger sister. Annette's younger sister, Cindy, was 11 when Annette disappeared. Their mother broke down and cried for the 6 months Annette was missing. Cindy named her oldest daughter Annette in honor of her sister. Bobbie Jo's daughter, Jackie, was also 11 when her mother was killed. Her childhood was filled with anxiety, depression, and sadness. Jackie had a hard time relating to other kids. When she saw crime shows on serial killers, it made her terribly emotional. Annette's 88-year-old mother, Eileen, never thought she would get the call after living in 39 years of hell. She thought there would be no closure, but after Eileen received the news about her daughter's killer, she felt she was ready to go when it was her time. Eileen was also thankful for all the TV people who kept the case in the media, including Unsolved Mysteries, Discovery Channel, and Paula Zahn. Jeff Oberholtzer hoped that after all the decades, the rest of Alan Phillips would bring closure and peace for all the families involved. Jeff was thankful to everyone who continued searching for the truth. They sent Alan Lee Phillips to Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility in Ordway, Colorado. His parole hearing would not take place until December 2062. On February 27, 2023, 73-year-old Alan Phillips took his own life in prison. Many investigators, including Charlie McCormick, believe that Phillips killed more women beyond Bobbie Oberholtzer and Annette Schnee. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit beyondcontemptpodcast.com for the links to the sources and music used in this episode. Research, writing, editing, audio production, and sound design were performed by me, Renee. If you like the show, please leave me a positive review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you so much, everyone.